September 7th, 1191. The coastal plains near Arsuf, Holy Land. For 7 hours, 35,000 Muslim warriors had hammered against the English king's defensive line. Arrows fell like rain. Horses screamed and died. The Hospitallers in the rear guard were begging for permission to charge. Still, Richard the Lionheart held his ground, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Across the battlefield, Saladin, the legendary sultan who had reconquered Jerusalem and shattered Crusader armies, commanded the most powerful Muslim force in the world. For weeks he had harassed Richard's march down the coast, picking at the Crusader army like a master huntsman bleeding his prey. Today he was certain the English king would finally break, but Saladin had never faced an enemy like Richard Plantagenet. The man they called Lionheart was about to demonstrate why he ranks among history's greatest military minds. In the coming minutes, 7,000 years of cavalry warfare would culminate in one devastating charge that would echo through the centuries. This is the story of Arsuf, where English tactical genius met Islamic military prowess in one of the most perfectly executed battles of the Middle Ages. It's the tale of how Richard the Lionheart turned defensive discipline into offensive triumph, of how 25,000 Crusaders broke an army twice their size, and of how one English king earned his place in legend. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're exploring the greatest victory of the Third Crusade, when Richard thus proved that English determination, tactical flexibility, and iron discipline could overcome any odds. But before we witness that earth-shaking cavalry charge, before we see Saladin's mighty army scattered across the Holy Land, we need to understand how Richard came to stake everything on this single decisive battle. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into medieval military history, make sure to subscribe. We cover the campaigns where English kings demonstrated their martial genius, the battles that forged legends through courage, skill, and unwavering resolve. The strategic situation in 1191 reflected the desperate state of Crusader fortunes in the Holy Land. Saladin's victory at Hattin in 1187 had shattered the kingdom of Jerusalem, capturing or killing most of the military orders and reducing Crusader territory to a handful of coastal fortresses. The fall of Jerusalem itself had sent shockwaves throughout Christendom, prompting the Third Crusade under three of Europe's greatest kings. By 1191, only Richard remained in the Holy Land after the deaths of Frederick Barbarossa and the departure of Philip Augustus. The English king faced a seemingly impossible task: restore Crusader power against an enemy who controlled the interior, commanded superior numbers, and fought on familiar ground. Richard's solution was characteristically bold and methodical. Rather than attempt the direct recapture of Jerusalem, a logistical nightmare without secure supply lines, he would establish unassailable control over the coastal strip. This meant taking Jaffa, the key port that could support future operations inland, but first he had to get there alive. The march from Acre to Jaffa covered 69 miles of hostile territory. Every mile would be contested by Saladin's forces, who knew the terrain intimately and could choose when and where to attack. Richard understood that this wasn't just a movement operation. It was a fighting withdrawal against one of history's most capable commanders. Richard's army reflected the international character of the crusading movement, but its backbone was unmistakably English. The core consisted of hardened veterans from Richard's continental campaigns, men who had learned their trade fighting in Normandy and Aquitaine. These professional soldiers formed the disciplinary foundation that would hold the entire army together under extreme pressure. The military orders provided elite heavy cavalry that formed the army's strike force. The Templars led the vanguard, while the Hospitallers took the most dangerous position as rear guard. These warrior monks combined religious fanaticism with professional competence, creating formations that would hold their ground against overwhelming odds. Supporting these elite troops were crossbowmen, whose weapons could outrange Muslim composite bows and pierce the finest Islamic armour. These men would prove crucial in maintaining the army's defensive cohesion during the long march to Arsuf. Richard's march order reflected his deep understanding of combined arms warfare. The army moved in 3 parallel columns, baggage and supplies along the coast, protected by the Crusader fleet, the main fighting force in the centre, and scouts and light cavalry protecting the inland flank. This formation created overlapping fields of fire while maintaining the flexibility to respond to attacks from any direction. The king's logistical genius showed in every aspect of the march. Unlike previous crusades that had rushed across hostile territory and arrived exhausted and depleted, Richard moved deliberately. His forces marched only in the cool morning hours, rested during the heat of the day, and maintained iron discipline throughout. The fleet provided constant resupply and evacuation for casualties, turning what should have been a desperate retreat into a methodical advance. Most importantly, Richard established clear rules of engagement that prioritized unit cohesion over individual heroism. No one would break ranks without direct orders. No one would pursue defeated enemies beyond supporting distance. This discipline would prove decisive when the moment of crisis arrived. Saladin's response demonstrated why he was considered the greatest Muslim commander of his age. Rather than attempt futile frontal assaults against Richard's disciplined formations, he implemented a sophisticated harassment campaign designed to break Crusader morale and discipline through constant pressure. The Sultan's strategy relied on the superior mobility of his mounted archers. These warriors could strike without warning, inflict casualties, and withdraw before the heavy Crusader cavalry could respond. Day after day, they peppered Richard's columns with arrows, targeting officers and horses, while staying beyond the range of effective retaliation. Saladin also understood psychological warfare. His forces used drums, war cries, and spectacular charges to create an atmosphere of constant threat. They displayed captured Crusader banners and executed prisoners within sight of Richard's army, hoping to provoke the undisciplined charge that would lead to Crusader destruction. The march became a test of wills between two master commanders. Richard needed to maintain discipline while advancing toward his objective. Saladin needed to break that discipline before the Crusaders reached safety. Both men understood that the outcome would determine the future of the Crusader states. For 6 days, the psychological pressure mounted. Muslim arrows found gaps in armour, bringing down knights and sergeants. Horses fell, forcing cavalry to fight on foot. The Hospitallers, bearing the brunt of the attacks as rearguard, suffered the heaviest casualties while begging Richard for permission to charge their tormentors. The crisis peaked as Richard's army approached the forest of Arsuf. Here Saladin had gathered his full strength for a decisive battle. 35,000 warriors, Turks, Arabs, Sudanese and Egyptians, emerged from the woodlands to surround the Crusader column. This was the moment both commanders had anticipated. September 7th dawned clear and hot as Richard's forces emerged from the forest onto the narrow coastal plain. The king chose his ground carefully, placing the army with its right flank protected by the sea and fleet, its left by marshes and broken ground that would limit Saladin's mobility advantage. The Muslim assault began at dawn with waves of mounted archers, supported by infantry from Sudan and Nubia. These attacks focused primarily on the Hospitallers in the rear, where Saladin hoped to cut off and destroy the most vulnerable part of Richard's army. Hour after hour, Muslim forces pressed their assault, seeking the breakthrough that would shatter Crusader resistance. Richard's response demonstrated tactical genius under extreme pressure. He maintained his defensive formation while rotating tired troops to safety, using his naval support to evacuate casualties and resupply ammunition. The crossbowmen proved their worth, their powerful bolts forcing Muslim archers to maintain respectful distance while inflicting steady casualties. But the true test came as the battle entered its critical phase. The Hospitallers, bloodied and desperate after hours of punishment, sent repeated messages begging for permission to charge. Richard refused, knowing that premature action would doom his army. He was waiting for the perfect moment, when Muslim forces would be too committed to retreat and too dispersed to resist. The breaking point arrived in mid-afternoon when exhaustion and frustration overwhelmed military discipline. The hospital marshal, William Borel, and Richard's household knight Baldwin Le Caron broke from the ranks without orders, charging into the Muslim lines with shouts of "St. George!" Their unauthorized attack threatened to isolate them from support and gift Saladin the victory he sought. Richard faced the commander's nightmare, seeing carefully laid plans disrupted by subordinate initiative. But his response showed why he earned his legendary reputation. Rather than sacrifice the charging knights or abandon his strategy, he instantly adapted. The moment Borel and Le Caron broke ranks, Richard ordered the general assault he had been planning all day. The Crusader charge that followed ranks among the most devastating cavalry attacks in military history. 7 hours of defensive patience exploded into minutes of overwhelming offensive violence. Knights who had endured arrows, taunts, and the deaths of their comrades finally unleashed their fury against enemies who had grown overconfident and careless. Richard led from the front, his sword cutting through Muslim ranks like a farmer through wheat. Contemporary chroniclers describe his personal combat in terms that strain credibility. But the psychological impact of seeing their king in the forefront of battle cannot be overstated. Men who might have wavered under less inspiring leadership followed Richard into the heart of enemy formations. The coordinated nature of the assault made it irresistible. While Richard's centre smashed through Saladin's left wing, the Templars and other heavy cavalry struck at different points along the Muslim line. Infantry followed to prevent regrouping, while crossbowmen continued their supporting fire. This combined arms attack shattered organised resistance within minutes. Saladin's response showed his own tactical brilliance even in defeat. Recognising that the battle was lost, he committed his elite Mamluk guards to cover the retreat of his main forces. These superb warriors fought desperate rearguard actions that prevented complete disaster, allowing most of the Muslim army to escape destruction. The Sultan's personal courage during the collapse earned grudging admiration from Crusader chroniclers. While his forces streamed toward the safety of the forest, Saladin remained on the field, trying to rally scattered units and organise some semblance of resistance. Only when defeat became undeniable did he finally withdraw. Richard's pursuit discipline proved as important as his attack coordination. Understanding that scattered forces could be ambushed in unfamiliar terrain, he halted the advance before Muslim resistance could reorganise. This restraint prevented the kind of counterstroke that had destroyed previous Crusader victories and ensured that Arsuf would remain a decisive triumph. The battle's outcome exceeded even Richard's optimistic projections. Crusader casualties numbered fewer than 1,000 against Muslim losses approaching 7,000. More importantly, the myth of Saladin's invincibility lay shattered across the coastal plain. The Muslim commander who had destroyed the Kingdom of Jerusalem had been thoroughly outfought by an English king. Strategic consequences flowed immediately from the tactical victory. The road to Jaffa lay open, giving Richard the secure port he needed for future operations. Muslim morale plummeted, while Crusader confidence soared. Saladin was forced to abandon offensive operations and concentrate on defending key strongholds, like Jerusalem itself. The psychological impact resonated throughout the medieval world. Richard had demonstrated that disciplined Western heavy cavalry, properly led and supplied, could defeat even the finest Muslim armies on favourable ground. This lesson influenced military thinking for generations, establishing tactical principles that would endure long after the Crusades ended. Individual acts of heroism became legendary throughout Christendom. Stories of knights continuing to fight with multiple arrows protruding from their mail told of armour's effectiveness and warrior determination. The image of crossbowmen maintaining steady fire while cavalry thundered past entered military folklore as an example of combined arms cooperation. Perhaps most significantly, Arsuf established Richard's reputation as one of history's great battle commanders. His combination of strategic patience, tactical flexibility, and personal courage created a template for successful military leadership that influenced commanders from medieval times to the present day. The aftermath of Arsuf demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of Crusader success. Richard's capture of Jaffa proceeded smoothly, giving him the secure base he needed for operations toward Jerusalem. His army, bloodied but victorious, had proven its superiority in open battle against the most formidable Muslim forces available, but strategic limitations remained formidable. Despite tactical victory, Richard lacked the numbers needed to garrison conquered territory, while maintaining field armies capable of further operations. Saladin, though defeated, still controlled the interior and could trade space for time while rebuilding his forces. The diplomatic dance that followed showed both leaders' political sophistication. Richard opened negotiations with Saladin's brother, Al-Adil, even proposing marriage alliances that would have revolutionized Middle Eastern politics. Though these radical proposals failed, they demonstrated the mutual respect that had developed between Christian and Muslim leaders. Richard's eventual agreement to the Treaty of Jaffa in 1192 reflected the practical limitations facing both sides. The Crusaders retained their coastal conquests while acknowledging Muslim control of the interior. Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands, but Christian pilgrims gained access rights that satisfied religious obligations without requiring permanent occupation. The treaty's terms showed how Arsuf's tactical brilliance translated into strategic advantage. Richard's demonstrated ability to defeat Muslim armies in open battle gave him negotiating leverage that previous Crusader leaders had lacked. Saladin, sobered by his defeat, proved willing to make concessions he might otherwise have refused. For the longer term, Arsuf extended the life of the Crusader states by nearly a century. The coastal strip that Richard secured provided a foundation for continued Christian presence in the Holy Land, while the tactical lessons learned at Arsuf influenced subsequent military operations throughout the region. The battle also established precedents for successful military cooperation between different Christian traditions. English, French, German, and Italian forces had fought together effectively under unified command, creating organisational models that would influence later crusading efforts and European military development generally. Modern military historians regard Arsuf as a masterpiece of defensive-offensive warfare. Richard's ability to maintain unit cohesion under extreme pressure, coordinate complex troop movements in combat conditions, and time the decisive counterattack perfectly demonstrates command skills of the highest order. The battle validates several enduring principles of military art. Superior logistics and supply arrangements provided the foundation for tactical success. Disciplined training and clear command structures enabled effective execution under pressure. Flexible adaptation to changing battlefield conditions turned potential disaster into decisive victory. Richard's integration of different military specialties, heavy cavalry, infantry, crossbowmen and naval support, created combined arms capabilities that overwhelmed enemies prepared to fight against individual components. This lesson influenced military thinking throughout the medieval period and beyond. Perhaps most importantly, Arsuf demonstrated that technological and tactical innovations mean nothing without the leadership and morale factors that enable their effective employment. Richard's personal example, strategic vision, and tactical patience created the conditions that made technical superiority decisive. If this is the kind of military history that captivates you, campaigns where English strategic brilliance overcame seemingly impossible odds, battles where individual courage combined with tactical genius to achieve legendary victories, conflicts that demonstrated English military excellence against the finest opponents of their age, then you know what to do. These are the stories that built reputations lasting across the centuries. The Battle of Arsuf stands as testament to what English arms could achieve when properly led and adequately prepared. Richard the Lionheart's masterpiece demonstrated that disciplined patience, tactical flexibility, and coordinated violence could triumph over numerical superiority when applied by military genius. The legacy extends far beyond the Crusades themselves. Richard's combination of strategic planning, tactical innovation, and inspirational leadership created a model of English military excellence that influenced commanders for generations. From medieval battlefields to modern operations, the principles demonstrated at Arsuf continue to guide military thinking. Most importantly, Arsuf proved that English determination and tactical brilliance could match any challenge when properly applied. The king who earned his title through courage, skill, and unwavering resolve showed that English military tradition could compete with and defeat the finest forces of any age or culture. Thank you for watching Britain's history. the battles where English martial excellence faced its greatest tests and emerged triumphant, told with the detail and drama they deserve.